My mother was standing at the kitchen counter when I walked in, and she didn't look up. That was the first thing I noticed. Not that she was busy, she was just standing there, holding a mug that had clearly gone cold, staring at something outside the window. She knew I was there. She just chose not to acknowledge me. That was Tuesday. By Thursday, I was gone. I should back up. My name is Celeste. I'm 31 now, though I feel both older and younger than that, depending on the day. I grew up in a house in Greenwich, Connecticut, the kind of neighborhood where the lawns get professionally edged and the holiday cards are coordinated by color palette. My father is a corporate attorney. My mother sits on 3 charitable boards and considers that her full-time occupation. My older brother, who they have always called their anchor, works at my father's firm and married a woman whose family summers on Nantucket. He checks every box they ever drew up. I was never going to be the anchor. I understood that early. What I didn't understand, until much later, was that they had already decided I was the problem, before I had done anything wrong, before I had given them any reason. I was the variable. The one who didn't quite fit. The daughter who asked too many questions at dinner, who cried at the wrong things, who once spent an entire Thanksgiving afternoon lying on the back lawn staring at the sky while everyone else discussed property values inside. I loved photography, not as a hobby, not as something I picked up at summer camp. I loved it the way some people love their faith, with something that felt bigger than a preference, something I couldn't talk myself out of, no matter how many times I tried. I started shooting when I was 14. By 17, I had a dark room in the basement that my father pretended not to know about. By the time I left for college, Northeastern, communications, a compromise, I had 3 external hard drives full of work and a very specific plan that I told no one about. The plan was this. I would get through school. I would not fail out, would not give them ammunition. I would take the classes they approved of, keep my GPA above a 3.5, and in the meantime, I would shoot everything. I would submit to every competition, every grant, every residency program I could find. I would build something parallel to the life they expected, quietly, carefully, until one of the 2 lives became real enough to step into. I worked a cash register at a campus bookstore during the week and shot weddings on weekends, not because I wanted to photograph weddings, but because weddings pay, and I needed the money to fund everything else. I shot architecture at dawn and strangers on the T and flooded parking lots at midnight. I submitted a series called Undercurrent, Portraits of Immigrant Women in Their 60s and 70s, taken over 2 years in Lowell, to a documentary photography grant my junior year. I didn't tell anyone. I applied under my full name, Celeste Hargrove, which is also my byline, which my family has never Googled because it has never occurred to them that I might have a byline. I got the grant. $42,000. I cried in the bathroom of the bookstore and then went back out and scanned someone's textbooks and did not say a word to anyone. That money went into a separate account, a bank my father didn't use, a bank I had opened myself with a weekend job paycheck when I was 19. By graduation, between the grant, the wedding work, and 2 more smaller awards, I had saved and earned just over $60,000. It wasn't enough to retire on. It wasn't enough to be. It was enough to buy time. Here is what I told my parents at graduation dinner, that I had applied for a fellowship in Portland, Oregon, that it was competitive, that I probably wouldn't get it, that I was going to spend the summer figuring out next steps, maybe looking at entry-level positions at marketing agencies, maybe considering grad school for communications. Here's what was actually true. I had already accepted the fellowship. I had already signed the lease on an apartment in the Woodstock neighborhood. I was leaving in 6 weeks, and I was never going to work at a marketing agency, and I had not applied to a single graduate program in communications. I am not proud of the deception, but I want to be honest about why I did it, not because I was a coward, though maybe I was, but because I had watched what happened in that house when someone went off script. I had watched my mother go silent for 3 days when my brother chose a different law school than the one my father preferred, and my brother was their favorite. I had watched my father hang up on his own sister at Christmas because she said something he disagreed with about his retirement timeline. I knew what happened to people who introduced unwanted information at the wrong moment. I had been studying it my whole life, so I managed the information. I gave them a soft landing that wasn't real, and I moved to Portland. The first year was the kind of hard that nobody glamorizes. The fellowship came with studio access and a small stipend and very little else. I shot constantly. I ate a lot of rice. I had one close friend, a ceramicist named Yolanda, who lived in the building next door and knocked on my door one January evening to ask if I had a Phillips head screwdriver and ended up staying for 4 hours. She became the closest thing I had to family on the West Coast. I submitted work everywhere. I got rejected most of the time, which is the part of any creative career that nobody talks about honestly. The volume of rejection, how mundane it eventually becomes, how you learn to open the email, absorb the no, close the laptop, and go shoot something else. I had a spreadsheet. Column A, submitted. Column B, outcome. Column C, follow-up. The column B cells that said declined outnumbered the others by a ratio I would rather not calculate. But some of them didn't say declined. A gallery in Seattle picked up 6 pieces from a new series, women who worked night shifts, photographed during their commutes at 4 a.m. The show ran for 8 weeks. A publication I had been reading since college ran a profile on me. Half a page, with 2 images. A collector reached out through the gallery, then another one. I called home every 2 weeks. My mother asked if I was eating. My father asked if I had updated my resume lately. My brother didn't ask much of anything because my brother and I have never had a conversation that lasted longer than 12 minutes. I told them the fellowship had been extended. This was true. I did not tell them what else was true. What else was true was that I had been approached by a curator in San Francisco about a major solo show. Not a small gallery, not a pop-up, a show centered around a new body of work I had spent 14 months building. The series was called Weight Bearing, and it was the best thing I had ever made. I knew it the way you sometimes just know things. Not arrogance, certainty. The show opened in April. I flew my friend Yolanda down. I wore a black dress I had bought secondhand and had altered by a tailor near my apartment, who charged me $40 and did a perfect job. I stood in that gallery and watched strangers stand in front of my photographs and go quiet, and I felt something settle in my chest that had been restless my entire life. 41 pieces sold. Total, $1.3 million. I want to be careful here, because I know how that number sounds, and I want to explain what it actually means before anyone starts doing math. The gallery takes 40%. Tax on the remainder is significant. And I reinvested a large portion into the next body of work, into equipment, into the business infrastructure that I had been running on goodwill and spreadsheets and finally needed to formalize. The number that changed my life was not a number that looks like freedom on a spreadsheet until you understand what the alternative was. But it was enough. It was enough. It was unambiguously, permanently enough. I did not call my parents after the show. I needed a few weeks. I needed to exist inside what had happened without immediately having to translate it for people who had never believed it was possible. My mother called me on a Sunday in June. It was the kind of call she makes when she has something to say but intends to arrive at it sideways. She started with the weather, moved to my brother's kitchen renovation, circled through a neighborhood friend's daughter's engagement, and then said, fairly casually, that my father and she had been a little worried about me, that they felt we hadn't connected in a while, that they were thinking about coming out to Portland to visit. I said that would be nice. I was calm. I had been practicing calm for a long time. They came in July. I picked them up from the airport in a car that was nicer than anything I had driven before. Nothing extravagant. A used SUV I had bought 6 months prior, but clean and new enough that my mother looked at it twice without saying anything. I took them to brunch. I took them to Powell's Books because my mother loves bookstores and I was trying. We walked along the waterfront. It was a perfectly pleasant afternoon, the kind that feels like it exists in a separate dimension from every difficult conversation you've ever had in your life. That evening at dinner, my father said, "So when are you going to start doing something real with your life?" He didn't mean it cruelly. I want to be accurate about that. He meant it the way he means most things, as a genuine question asked from inside a worldview so complete and self-consistent that it doesn't have room for information that contradicts it. To him, what I had been doing for the past several years was an extended adolescence, a phase, something that would eventually resolve itself into a recognizable shape. A job title he could explain at the firm's holiday party, a path he could track and measure and approve. I set down my fork. I looked at him. I said, I had a gallery show in San Francisco in April. 41 pieces sold. I have been supporting myself entirely through my work for 3 years. I own my equipment outright. I have a business account and I have more in savings right now than I did when I graduated college. He looked at me the way people look at a word they don't recognize. Like maybe if he waited, context would appear. My mother said, "But Celeste, is it stable? Is it stable you can count on? And that was the moment I understood that nothing I said was going to change anything. Not the show, not the sales, not the 3 years of documented, real, measurable success. They had a version of me stored somewhere in their minds. The difficult one, the variable, the one who needed to come back to the family script before it was too late. And that version was more real to them than anything standing across the dinner table. So I said, "Yes, Mom, it's stable." And I changed the subject. They left on a Sunday. My father shook my hand at the airport. My mother hugged me briefly and told me to get more sleep. And that was that. 3 months later, my brother called. I hadn't spoken to my brother in 4 months, maybe 5. We don't fight. We just don't have much connective tissue. He called on a Wednesday evening and I almost didn't pick up. And then I did. And he said he needed to talk to me about something. He and his wife were separating. The house was going to have to be sold. He was looking at taking a leave from the firm. He needed, and here he paused for a long time, he needed to know if I could help him out financially. Just for a few months. Just while he got back on his feet. I want to be clear. I felt for him. Divorce is real pain, and I don't minimize that. He is not a bad person. He is a person who was handed a map at birth and followed it without ever questioning whether it led anywhere worth going, and now the map had failed him and he didn't know what to do. I asked him how much. He said $80,000. I was quiet for a moment, and then I said, "I love you, and I'm not going to be able to do that." He asked why. I said, "Because Dad is a senior partner at a firm that bills $400 an hour. Because you have equity in a house that hasn't sold yet. Because there are options that exist that don't involve calling the sister you haven't spoken to in 5 months and asking for $80,000. He said, "I thought you'd want to help." I said, "I do want to help. I'm just not able to be the help." There was a long silence, and then he said he had to go, and he hung up, and I sat with my phone in my hand for a while. My mother called 2 days later. She said she'd heard I'd spoken to my brother and that she was disappointed in me. That family helps family. That she didn't understand what had happened to me out there in Oregon. That I had changed into someone she didn't recognize. I let her finish. Then I said, "Mom, for 3 years, I built something real. I didn't ask for help. I didn't ask for money. I didn't call when it was hard. I called every 2 weeks and asked how you were. And when it worked, when I actually made something work, no one in this family said congratulations. No one asked to see the show. No one said they were proud." I paused. I care about this family, but I am not a resource, and I need you to understand the difference. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Your father and I just worry about you." And I said, "I know, but worrying isn't the same as seeing me." We ended the call cordially. Not warmly, but cordially. And I sat in my apartment in Portland, the one I had upgraded. Finally, the previous spring, a 2-bedroom with good light and a spare room, I turned into a studio, and I didn't cry. I had thought I would, but I didn't. What I felt instead was something quieter. Something like the particular peace of having said the true thing, out loud, to the people it needed to be said to. The second series sold better than the first. I'm working on a 3rd body of work now. It's the best thing I've made. I know that the way I've started to know a few things, not from certainty about the outcome, but from the quality of attention I'm giving it, from the way I feel when I sit down to work in the morning, from the fact that it scares me a little, which is usually a sign that it matters. Yolanda got married last fall to a furniture maker she met at an arts fair, and I was the photographer. I shot the entire day in film because that's what she wanted, and the images came back looking like something that will last 100 years. I cried in the car on the way home. The good kind. My parents and I talk every few weeks. It is not warm exactly, but it is honest in a way it never was before. My father asked me recently how the photography business was going. I told him it was going well. He said, "Good. That's more than I expected, and I'm choosing to take it." My brother is doing better. He got an apartment. He's seeing a therapist, which I'm genuinely glad about. He texted me a photo of his new place in September, a small 1-bedroom in Stamford, and wrote, "Starting over." I wrote back, "Good place to start. I don't have a mansion. I have good work, a room full of light, and a life that is entirely my own." I kept thinking for years that eventually there would be a moment where my family looked at what I had built and finally understood it. A moment where the version of me they held in their heads dissolved and they just actually saw me for the first time. I don't wait for that anymore, not because I've given up on them, but because I've stopped needing their vision of me to match mine. That's the thing no one tells you when you leave. The hardest part isn't the money or the loneliness or the years when nothing seems to be working. The hardest part is learning to be the only witness to your own becoming. To do the thing quietly, without anyone watching. To hold it yourself before you can show it to anyone else. Have you ever built something, a business, a relationship, a version of yourself, that the people closest to you refuse to see? Because if you have, then you already know. The seeing was never really the point. The building was. And I'm not done building yet. I've thought a lot about what actually happened. Not the gallery show, not the phone calls, not the money, but the thing underneath all of it. The mechanism. Because there is one, and I don't think it's mysterious or magical. It's just cause and effect, played out slowly enough that people mistake it for luck or fate, when really it's just the accumulated weight of every choice you made when no one was watching. I chose to shoot photographs when I was 14, in a house that didn't value it. I chose to save money quietly, submit work quietly, build something quietly. Every time I had the option to quit, and there were a lot of those moments, more than I've described, more than I can fully account for, I chose not to. Not because I was brave, because I couldn't figure out how to be a person without it. That's not courage. That's just knowing what you are. And here's the thing about that kind of stubbornness, the kind that comes from something real. It compounds. Not immediately. Not in ways that feel triumphant while they're happening. You don't feel it while you're eating rice and refreshing your email and opening another rejection. But it's accumulating anyway. Every piece you finish, every submission you send, every morning you show up to the work, it's adding to something. You just can't see the total yet. My father is a smart man. I want to be clear about that. He built a real career through real discipline and real sacrifice, but intelligence without curiosity eventually calcifies. He stopped asking questions somewhere along the way about what a good life could look like for someone different from him, about whether his map was the only valid map. And when you stop asking questions, you stop being able to see things that don't fit your existing answers. That's not a moral failing. It's a kind of intellectual atrophy. And the cost of it in his case was that he missed most of his daughter's actual life. My brother followed the map, and the map failed him anyway. I don't say that with any satisfaction. I say it because I think it matters. That compliance is not the same as safety. Doing what's expected of you does not protect you from the things that can go wrong. It just means that when they do go wrong, you have less of yourself to fall back on because you spent so many years not developing the parts of yourself that didn't fit the plan. I built those parts quietly, imperfectly, over years. And when things got hard, and they got hard, genuinely hard, I had something to stand on that was mine. Yolanda said something to me once, early on, when I was frustrated and broke and questioning everything. She said, "The work protects you. Keep making it." She wasn't being poetic. She meant it practically. The work was the thing that made every hard day survivable. Because the work was evidence that I was becoming something, even when I couldn't prove it to anyone else yet. I think about Celeste at 22 sometimes, driving a loaded car toward Portland, heart pounding, telling myself I'd made the right call while being genuinely uncertain whether I had. I want to tell her, "You're going to be okay," not because everything works out perfectly. It doesn't. But because you're going to keep choosing the thing you actually are, over and over, and that choice has a direction to it. The people who doubted you are not villains. They're just people who ran out of questions too soon. Don't do that. Keep asking.